Well, everyone, I want to welcome you to this panel discussion where we'll be talking about television's evolutionary digital transition and its effects on consumer behavior. And boy, we've got a great panel set up with three pretty esteemed television executives. They're going to lend their background and insights into this topic. And by way of background, I'm currently a graduate student at Texas State University. And this is from one of my final projects, Digital Media Issues, for a class that I'm taking. But the goal is eventually when I graduate to be like Evan when I grow up and maybe actually get a chance to teach on the collegiate level. So Evan, you're my benchmark, my man. So what I'd like to do is just briefly, if we could, just go around the horn and have you all just sort of give your elevator speeches on who you are and your background, and then we'll just kind of get right into it. And why don't we start with ladies first? Bridget, would you tell us who you are?
Of course, I'm Bridget Baker, and I spent most of my career at NBC Universal in the cable division, helping to launch their first cable network, which was CNBC, and spent many years there, eventually running the entire subscription revenue business, and was there about 23 years. And then in the last well, gosh, it's been almost 10 years, I guess. I have been doing a number of things. I've learned it's called a portfolio career. So consulting, running an advisory practice called Baker Media, serving on public corporate boards as well as private corporate boards, and helping longtime colleagues like Bruce do things like this.
Thank you very much. That sounds great. Evan, why don't we jump over to you?
My name's Evan Shapiro. I've run television networks, IFC, Sundance Channel. I've helped create streaming services called CISO for NBC Universal. I've produced a bunch of television, including Portlandia, and This Film Is Not Yet Rated, and Please Like Me. In recent years, I've pivoted and become, again, much like Bridget said, a portfolio executive. I teach at two different universities, NYU and Fordham University. I write about the media universe. I'm known in some circles as the media universe cartographer because I map the shape and dimensions of the media universe. And I use data and to do that, to drive that infographic-led business. But I write in depth on a newsletter called Media War and Peace about the media universe. And then I also do a lot of consulting with clients throughout the media universe, both here and in Europe.
Great background. Thank you. Now, no relation because the Shapiro was pronounced Shapiro, not Shapiro. We have Doug Shapiro.
I wish we were related. I call him Cuz on LinkedIn just to create some confusion. But so the elevator version is I have never run a cable network, but otherwise a lot of similarities with Bridget and with Evan. So I've been in and around the media business about 30 years. I was an analyst for 15 years on Wall Street covering basically up and down the video value chain. And then I went to Time Warner. I was there for 12 years. I ran investor relations, a bunch of strategy roles. And my last role was running strategy for Turner. And then I left shortly after the ill-fated AT&T Warner Media merger, Time Warner merger. And since then, I've been doing a bunch of things. I spent 18 months on a failed SPAC. That was super fun. And now I am also writing. I write a Substack called The Mediator. And doing a bunch of advisory work. I'm also a senior advisor for Boston Consulting Group.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you all. Appreciate it. And I'd love to just get right into it. Since we're going to be talking about the historical evolution of digital, I think it's probably best to maybe take a step back before we go forward and just give a brief overview about the global transition from analog to digital back in the 1990s. Bridget, would you mind kind of kicking this off for us based on your experience and what you saw?
Not at all. I don't know that it's a global perspective since I was very much immersed in the America business of cable. But yeah, I guess in a couple of sentences, what I might say is I was one of those people pounding the pavement at every head end across America, trying to, have NBC, which was very much arm's length as a broadcaster to most cable operating companies. They didn't particularly want to do business with broadcasters, and trying to convince these. And by the way, let me pause and say that in the early 90s, there were not 8 major distributors. There were about 6,000 distributors divided up in the nation by zip code and city franchise agreements. So you were dealing with independent entrepreneurial people in many, 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 many communities and states that were all different. And the idea was many of these people were building out, that was the term, their cable operations from what might have been, again, colloquial phrases, a 330 megahertz system to a 750 megahertz system, to eventually being able to launch what then also was referred to as hits or head end in the sky. And that's what provided many, many cable operators with their very first digital channels. So in a span of relatively of a very short period of time, if you want to cite it as the early 90s and 20 years later, it's been an absolute revolution in terms of how content is delivered, distributed, and technologically formatted from being an analog cable channel to a digital stream.
Perfect. Well said. Thank you. Thank you. Anything to add, gentlemen? Or should we keep moving?
You know, I think people forget how much the back end tech of television has changed. I mean, we know it's fragmented audiences and fragmented experiences, and we're on new devices and we're on new apps, and the model keeps changing, not always working, but always changing. And I think in the end, I mean, I've done a lot of research and work on things like how do you the process of getting apps to all the various devices, and the tech stack, and now the data tech stack that goes in behind, you know, the changing television landscape. And, you know, as Bridget, you know, enumerated, it's not always what gets thought of when you think about the transformation of television. And there's looming problems. When all the television homes in the United States start streaming almost exclusively 24 hours a day, I don't know that our infrastructure can handle it. You know, if you've ever noticed one of your apps lagging or crashing, you know, that's with today's usage. Imagine when it's literally 100% of television homes, or at least in most, you know, high-end areas. I don't know that we've adapted the infrastructure. There's going to be a bottleneck of data at some point. And I think, you know, we have to keep, it's not just about the shows and the apps and the brands. It's also about how does the TV get to you?
That's great. Thanks, Evan. Doug?
It's an interesting question because it's a potentially really broad question. So I'll give a broader answer that even extends beyond TV. But, you know, prior to the advent of digital, there was no common language between different kinds of media, right? So like in nature, sounds and images happen analog. And so in an analog world, there's no common, you know, the atomic unit of a photograph, pre-digital, and a song, they're different, right? So what the advent of digital did is it created a common language for all information goods, which is bits, right? Now everything is bits. And once everything is on this, you know, there's a universality of bits in the sense that they're the standard unit for all, you know, storage, transport, processing, regardless of the network, regardless of the device, regardless of the application. And so by creating this universal language of information goods, it set the stage for all future innovation in all the innovation that we know in media today. Really started with that big bang of digitization. So it really depends on how you're even asking the question, what you mean when you ask the question. But, you know, the fact that you can compress video, right? The fact, you know, the idea of digital video and having a more consistent image quality. And then digital was the precursor, was a necessary precondition for the internet, which if you didn't have a universal language for information goods, you'd have no internet, right? So now we have the internet. The internet, prior to the internet, it was very expensive to distribute media because you needed to own the underlying infrastructure, but the internet unbundled the information from the infrastructure. And so that's what was the, catalyst for Netflix and YouTube and like all the stuff we talk about today. So if you step back from your question, it's like, digitization was the big bang moment in the media business that everything we talk about now really stems from that.
And which sets us up for a discussion about not only digital television, but then also digital online viewing and streaming, and how that has just sort of affected consumer choice. We're seeing that, of course, with cord cutting. Bridget, you certainly, like me, you were an MVPD distribution person. We remember the days when there were 100 million subscribers. Let's talk about the effect that OTT is having on cord cutting. Bridget, do you mind jumping in?
I would, to me, and maybe I'm a little bit immersed in this because in particular, these last 10 days, I've been tearing through this book by an NYU professor and sociologist called The Anxious Generation. His name is Jonathan Haidt, and I happen to be the mother of 3 Gen Zs qualified by this birth, anyone born after 1995 or 1996. So I have so much of my view about cord cutting is tied into generational adaptation. Just all things being equal, if the audience had stayed the same, I don't know that, cord cutting would necessarily have been so rapidly adapted. And I mean that a little bit back to what Evan and Doug are saying about the technology parts of it. But what was happening is we were having this Gen Z or this, youngest generation growing up with portable kind of internet portals in their pockets. It's a lot of P's, but what that meant is they came of age at a time when there was zero tolerance for any advertising interruptions, a huge acceptance of user-generated content, and very little interest in kind of how we were all raised with dominant broadcast prime time programming, which all had a scheduled calendar mentality in our brains. If we knew a certain show Thursday night, NBC is the best example of this, prime time, must see TV. Back in the 90s, we were saying with Friends and ER, and then of course the Law and Order franchise, all of that was broadcast scheduled viewing. If the audience had not changed so dramatically, cord cutting might not be quite what it is today. But we had this giant generational shift, in large part due to the development of the iPhone and portable devices. And that has very much driven the concept of, what is this old lunky screen here in my, I don't even know what that is and why would I ever turn it on? It's saturated with interruptions and I never know, I'm not getting access to the things I want to see right now. So it was also the on-demand mentality of, I want to go and see it uninterrupted when I want to see it. And I think the acceleration, the adaptation of that is what accelerated cord cutting. So for giant, vertically integrated public entities like Comcast Corporation, there was no choice but to quickly shift from the broadcast mentality to where the viewers were going and the younger generations. And that was all on portable devices. So you have the evolution of things like, Evan was actually one of the first, CISO, which he mentioned, it was one of the first attempts, I think, outside of our Hulu creation and that period, where it was an attempt to take a vertical of just comedy content and put it out there in a, protected, specific type of content. But now you have Peacock TV and you have Paramount Plus and you have all of these that are coming out of the big broadcast companies that are there for that viewer who just says, why do I need this other whole ecosystem? It doesn't serve me anymore.
Yeah, thank you, Bridget. Evan, why don't we toss to you?
Yeah, so just a couple of things. I think some of the generational shift. So I agree with everything Bridget said. Absolutely, especially about the access and the mobility, the decoupling or unbundling, as Doug called it, of the video economy was what accelerated the cord cutting. But there's just a couple of misnomers. I think, if you're under 30, you never cut the cord, you never had the cord. Maybe you did in your parents' house. But when you moved out, you went right to a cordless experience, which is also a misnomer because you have broadband. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, the unbundling of the ecosystem. The video bundle in cable, the pay TV bundle, hasn't been profitable for a very long period of time for the providers, not the publishers. The guaranteed carriage and the bundling of platforms for Disney and Warner Disco Brothers, which is what I call Warner Brothers Discovery, and Paramount and Fox and all the rest of the publisher aggregators, was enormously profitable because they kept charging. ESPN kept charging more and more and more for fees and rights every year. But in its heyday of the golden era of television and the height of pay TV, the cable companies and the MVPDs were not making their fortunes off of television. It was a break-even product. They were making it off of the accidental products they discovered while they build the pipes out for cable television and HD TV, which is broadband and telephone. And that triple play of telephone, broadband, and video created a protected shell around the Hollywood product, which again was only a break-even proposition. It was a loss leader to a certain extent to get people marketed into this larger play where the profit was in phone and broadband. As phone became something no one has, and as the video bundle became less rational because it was charging so much for channels that I was not using, ESPN being a great example of that, the idea that I would subscribe to a bundle of television shows for economies of scale makes apps, when you remove it from your broadband and your telephone, it becomes so inefficient and expensive that there's no reason to do it. So then suddenly Netflix, which was, basically free when it launched, but even now you can get 3 or 4 services and still pay less than you would on pay TV. When you add YouTube TV to that, and that's a good question, like, is that cord cutting? Because that's really a cable package, but it's delivered via the internet. Then suddenly you're getting back to the price again, but you're still choosing everything you're paying for as opposed to paying for thousands of things you'll never watch. So I do think that's a nuance that's one of the reasons why traditional television is in such pain right now. Then you look at Amazon Prime, which is basically the new version of the triple play. You get home free delivery, you get, all these other products. It's the one subscription no one will ever cancel. And it's got that same protective shell around things like Freevee and Prime that really nobody else in TV or streaming has right now. And then lastly, the one point I would disagree with Bridget is Comcast, having worked at Comcast and launched CISO there, and their brethren in the horsemen of the streaming apocalypse, moved to streaming way too late. Way.
Completely agreed. Yeah. Well, it was part of that reliance on what you've just articulated, right?
Yeah, and they were selling.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. They thought it would last forever. Well, who's going to break this bundle? We'd have no churn. And then all of a sudden, and then they were also empowering the Huns that tore down their empire, selling their content to Hulu and Netflix.
100%.
And then they became addicted to those revenues as well. So, to a certain extent, the demise of the pay TV cord is multifaceted. It was always accelerated by some form of technology. But also, don't sleep on the fact that most of the C-suites in traditional media completely mismanaged the transformation and the evolution from, traditional TV to the streaming world that we live in now.
Doug, anything you want to add, or should we keep moving?
No, I mean, I agree with all that. The way I always think about this is through the Clayton Christensen's framework of disruptive innovation. But basically, industries get disrupted when they overserve consumers, and the old pay TV business, it was over serving consumers. It was over earning, right? Like, look at the margins in the cable network business. They were amongst the best margins in the economy, high 30% EBITDA margins, very low capital intensity. Used to see these stats from Nielsen that the average household was watching like 7 or 8% of the networks they got each month. And so people were just forced, you had this forced bundle jammed down everyone's throat. There was this cozy cartel between the programmers and the distributors. They used to go to the negotiations and all put their guns on the table, and they hated each other, but they still all had this. There was this kind of mutually beneficial arrangement where the consumer was the loser, right? The consumer was paying for too many networks that he or she didn't watch, and then again with this disruptive model, the way that it happens is always a disruptor that comes in from the bottom, and the catalyst for them coming in the bottom is generally some sort of technological innovation. And again, what I was talking about before, the innovation was the advent of the internet, and it lowered the barriers to entry to get into the distribution business. That's what enabled Netflix to come in. And it effectively enabled people to create their own synthetic bundles. They no longer had this huge bundle jammed down their throat, and that really just sort of squeezed the excess returns out of the pay TV ecosystem, right? So when you think about
the irrational,
yeah,
greedy, overreaching
well, the
return.
unsustainable, right? Like, this is like this is like on the third page of your Econ 201 textbook, is that the value in an ecosystem is a function of the moats in the ecosystem. And when if a moat or multiple moats erode, then the excess returns will get squeezed out. And that's what happened. Like, when you look at half the headlines you see about the media, but why did Bob Iger come back? Why are RSNs going bankrupt? Why did the writers and the directors go on strike? Like, all of it, why is Paramount for sale? All this stuff is really an industry that is struggling because there's less money to go around, right? There's less money to go around today than there used to be, and everybody is like running around with their hair on fire because of that. So yeah, I mean, when you say like, what is the effect of streaming, it really it completely upended the traditional pay TV ecosystem. And since the biggest media companies are predominantly video companies, it really it upended the whole, all of the big media companies as we know them. And just what Bridget said, certainly like the generational shift, it, it's hard to separate the generational shift from this transition, because these younger generations, like as Evan was saying, they weren't cord cutters because they never had the cord to begin with. So it's sort of like this virtuous circle. But the fact that we were going through a generational shift at the same time, and the advent of mobile, like that, certainly, I agree that it accelerated all that.
Speaking on the generational shift, certainly the older generation, I think the cable operators could hang their hat on live TV, right? Sports, news, award shows, where we just felt like we had to have the cable package in order to tune in to the video product and watch live TV. Now, with the emergence of all these streaming services, and with the cartel trying to figure out how they can maintain revenue while still getting these live TV award shows and sports and news out there, how do they handle that? How do they sort of, they're realizing, I think, that that's not as important perhaps as it used to be. But I'd love, Evan, if you wouldn't mind maybe jumping in and sort of touch on that topic for a little bit, because certainly with the emergence of these streaming services, how has that changed with live TV?
We're about to find out, right? So, I mean, I think live TV is going to be one of the more important components.
You mean with the NBA when you say we're about to find out?
No, I mean, many different reasons. The NBA is a really big one. But we're going to have 2 exclusively streaming playoff football games next year. So really the advent of live streaming inside premium experiences is relatively new. Started really in earnest 2 years ago with Amazon's Thursday Night Football. And they've been delivering massive audiences as a result. And they're about to change the nature of television advertising as a result of that as well. But I think one of the key elements, so absent Amazon Prime, the churn in premium streaming has gone up 40% in the last 36 months. Last year, premium streaming signed up, all of premium streaming together signed up 165 million new subscribers and lost 141 million subscribers. That's not a great business. 1 in every 3 new signups for a premium streaming service is somebody who serial churns. Who signs up, and raise your hand if you've ever done this, signs up for a service, binges the heck out of something, and then cancels before the next billing cycle. And that's happening, more and more. And Antenna says that's 1 in 3 new subscribers. So how do you keep people around? And by the way, this is not just important for the lifetime value from a subscription standpoint. When a subscriber churns, you also can't advertise to them. So as Netflix adds ads and Disney Plus adds ads, if someone's churned, that's lost impressions. So you're losing twice. So I think that it's no accident that Netflix is moving money out of scripted and out of film into live events like Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson and the Tiger Woods golf match and the new their new deal, their $5 billion deal with World Wrestling Entertainment. They're relocating money into utility programming, live appointment viewing, Peacock and their exclusive streaming game. And what's interesting is, despite my predictions to the contrary, Peacock kept a lot of those subscribers they signed up for that playoff game. And so, it's I think as more and more sports moves over to premium streaming, I think live will be, live events, live finales of reality shows, just like on the TV, live news, CNN on Max, and in the FAST area, news is the biggest, most watched, most utilized genre of content. So I think I think live is going to be one of the fastest growing areas of the content economy. I also think ultimately for retention and the business model, recurring live utility programming, daily news, shows like The Daily Show that might show up on streaming services, I think are going to be more and more important. That's also going to, as I said before, put even more stress on the infrastructure. Like if in India, Reliance gets about 54 million people live for cricket matches streaming. I don't know that the American, which is odd because America you would think be more advanced than any other country in the world, but I don't know that our streaming infrastructure can handle. The streamers can handle it going out, but the bottlenecks in our neighborhood where the broadband splinters and goes into, in my neighborhood, 1,000 apartment buildings, each with 100 apartments in it. I don't know, man. I don't know that when a huge playoff game that isn't a blowout and is exclusively available on a pay service happens, I think you're going to, again, I think we're about to see what's going to happen as live becomes a bigger part of the streaming diet.
Bridget, would you like to add anything more to this transition?
I would just say, I love that when Evan describes that, it makes me think of fiber to the node. I remember that so well, again, colloquial terms of just the era, but they're seeing it again. And Evan, you're in New York City, right? So that's its own situation. But I do know for a fact that where I grew up, which is, remote Southeast Alaska, and the cable operator there has shifted to an IPTV delivery or is in process of doing that. So even just the Super Bowl that we just had, do you guys remember back in the day, there would be these things that would make it to the front page of multi-channel news, or, during the Super Bowl, someone would have cut the cord, at a head end out there in Wichita or something. And the whole community was up in arms because they'd missed a huge live event because someone had sabotaged the cable system, right? Hate my cable operator or something. What is that? That's vandalism and, vigilante, to take an expression, vigilante blank. But it's happening already in these communities where you have shifted more, a different smaller cable MSO, MVPD has shifted already to an IPTV platform. And when you have huge live sports, for instance, and all of that needs to get sent through the system, there are big glitches and they have blackout and they miss 20 minutes of the game. And that stuff is already happening. And I think that, to your point about the exclusive NFL games on Peacock, that was going to be a very big test to see how the technology would handle it. And it was an interesting, I don't think that they had, short of a couple different things, they didn't have a massive blackout anywhere in any community, I don't think.
No, not that I saw.
Yeah.
Thank you. Doug, anything to add?
One of the things we've lost in the shift to streaming is these massive communal events. The TV viewing used to have a very large social component, right? There was a community aspect to it, and there's very little of it that can actually, well, first of all, there's there's nothing that people are watching real time, right, or live, and then audiences are so splintered. So I think sports is still a unique thing. I mean, you could look at look at the ratings and what proportion of the top telecasts are football, or it's just it's become, I don't know, Evan, maybe it was your quote. Was it your quote recently? I saw that TV is becoming breaks between sports or something like that.
Yeah, break between live events. I mean, because you can include, things like Macy's Day Parade, but nothing is like the NFL, to be honest.
Right. Yeah. So, or I mean, even, you look at like the women's NCAA basketball final or whatever. So, I think the relative value of those kinds of events is only going up.
I want to shift a little bit to Evan. You talked about how you sort of chart sort of all the movement that goes on in the industry. Let's talk about consolidation, shifting ownership, and Wall Street, media stocks, and online TV influence, all of that. Would love to get your input to what you think where the industry is headed with all of that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I guess we're about to see again. So, Paramount's about to sell to somebody. Disco Brothers will probably sell within the year. And a lot of the smaller ones and bigger ones, I think, have an M&A in their on their horizon, even the big ones. I think that's primarily for the reasons I described before, which is if you had to run a cable channel outside a bundle in the last era of television, you would have died because there was no way to make the economics work without the dual revenue stream, without the protective shell of the pay TV bundle, but also the triple play bundle.
I think that's my coffee mug collection, Evan. All the networks that
all
did
the networks. Die. Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Now look at all the streamers who will die for the same exact reason. If they're Netflix, because of first mover advantage, and almost exclusively because of first mover advantage, they have less issues. They are profitable. They have way less of a churn problem. They don't even really yet have a churn problem, but they are having an issue moving people over to the ad tier because they've trained people to watch Netflix without ads. Mm-hmm. But, and plus they're about to run out of new subscribers who are transferring over from, sharing passwords. So in 36 months, when you look at standalone apps like Netflix, like Disney, like Paramount Plus, like Max, it's really, I don't see how they stand alone and make it all work between churn and, frankly, their lack of competitive advantage in advertising over Google, Meta, and Amazon, who generate 60% of all ads on Earth, those three. So how's Paramount Plus going to compete with that? How's Pluto compete with that? How's Tubi compete with that? So I think most of the M&A is going to be the new triple playing of the media ecosystem, where you get a new iPhone and suddenly you're getting Max and, Apple Music and news and cloud service, where you subscribe to whatever Microsoft's bundle becomes and you get Paramount Plus and it becomes much more of a bundled experience. Or you're going to look at things like T-Mobile's bundling of Max and Netflix with mobile service, which is a churn killer in a good way, right? Mm-hmm. So I think whether through M&A I think most of the M&A will ultimately be towards that destination, combining big tech and their flywheel, where they don't necessarily need to make a profit off of the video that they're providing. Amazon, there is no way that Prime is profitable, right? We're not even sure whether YouTube is profitable, right?
Right.
So, you know, I just think that's going to drive most of the M&A or it should, if you're smart, because Comcast and Disco Brothers merging makes no sense. Paramount and Comcast merging makes no sense. It's just TV and TV, and you can't find enough economies of scale while growing revenues to make that thing work. Look at Disco Brothers, which has lost 60% of its value since it merged. That didn't work, and it didn't work dramatically. And as many efficiencies as they try to find, it's never gonna work. It's never gonna work. So they're going to have to figure something else out, and getting back inside that protective shell that the triple play offered in some other flywheel or through partnerships. You know, if Max, the New York Times, and Peloton decided to create a bundle, I might never break up with it. So like
That's
really inventing, you know, Paramount Plus and Walmart have a really good subscription bundle. It works really, really well. It's great at acquisitions and it lowers churn. So look for more of that to happen both inside M&A and as the reason for M&A.
I think it's worth following up on something too. A couple things, observations, Evan, that you've teed up. One is in the examples you're providing, of course, the master is the technology platform, Microsoft, Amazon, T-Mobile. It's not the content. That's one thing. And that harkens back to me to the earliest cable days, where it really was a technology. You were selling the cable, which was, if you lived in what they used to call a D county, remember, in Wyoming or Wisconsin or any of these places, you were trying to import the closest broadcast signal, mostly so you could watch an NFL game. So if you lived in Casper, Wyoming, and Denver was the closest NBC affiliate, the guys in Casper had figured out how to put up a big antenna, CATV, and be able to watch the Bronco game. I mean, that was a technology play, if you want to call it that. The other thing, just anecdotally, I'll share with no names attached, which is one of those paradigm shifts I experienced about 10 years ago. I was having a meeting at Amazon Prime, and they weren't quite where they are today, honestly, in sort of their content expansion and evolution. However, they were beginning to think about it. And I went over there for a meeting, and a lot of things I observed, which I'll leave out of this, but the biggest one, the takeaway, was I sort of sat there and I said, I'm not sure I could even be in this environment. I don't see this as actually a business that's being run, and I'm just talking about the content side as a business. It feels a little bit like no one's making any money. I mean, it's just kind of this, what would you call this? And I'm looking at the couple of guys I was sitting with, and I said, a lost leader. You're sort of developing a lost leader. And there was just dead silence in the room. And then the most senior guy said, well, Bridget, of course, you're zeroing in on a point that we would never really express outside of here, but you're right. The management above us is focused on the width of the corrugated cardboard. And I just thought, and I mean, this was 10 years ago. So it was not even where Amazon is today. And, look, I had grown up inside General Electric. Let's be clear. I mean, they were my parent for most of my career at NBC Universal. So I got the dynamic of having a parent who was focused on big worldwide manufacturing and many other issues. But to hear about that width of the corrugated cardboard comment was one that I thought, yeah, so why would you actually put yourself in the lost leader job? You're really the lost leader, like DVDs used to be for a film studio like Universal, sitting out in these big bins in what they called the big brick and mortar stores of Walmart and Costco. It was the lost leader to get people in the store. So I just think those two observations on what Evan has teed up is so interesting.
Thanks.
Yeah, and even taking that one step further, are we going to get to a point where MVPDs are no longer selling video? I know we see that with Wide Open West. They stopped selling, and now they're just selling in YouTube TV. Comcast, Charter, can they ever reach the point? Is there a tipping point of some sort that any of you see?
I don't think that would be wise. I think it's still too good a marketing tool I mean, when you ask Jeff Bezos, when Jeff Bezos first started talking about Amazon Prime back in the day, he's like, when somebody sees me, when we win an Oscar, which they did, early on, when we win an Emmy, which they did early on, when people watch our shows, they buy more shit on our platform. So he saw it as not a loss leader, but as a marketing expense. I think, it's too valuable a marketing product. We still touch all these products every day, but it's going to be way different. I don't think it'll be the same, markup mentality. It might be much more revenue sharing based. When you look at what Charter and Comcast are doing with Zumo, I do believe they're building they're building a version of what they've already had for decades in the model of Roku. And Roku will talk about Roku channel all day long, but people don't realize this. Roku channel is, however big it is, it's a fast channel. It's as big as any other fast channel. But 130 million people touch Roku in the United States every day. 80 million homes. So, that's bigger than Comcast ever was. Fire touches somewhere around 30 or 40 million homes. That's as large as Comcast ever was. So I do think you're going to see the move to the virtual MVPD. YouTube TV is the only cable system that's growing. It's now larger than Cox, the fourth largest cable system in the US. But you're going to be selling premium streaming services and taking a rev share from that, and distributing fast and taking a rev share from that. And I think that's ultimately, as an outsider, that's how I understand Zumo to be built. It's about execution, and about bundling it with other utilities. And Comcast, I think, it's no coincidence that Comcast and Charter are now the two fastest mobile providers, fastest growing mobile providers in the US. And so that's your new triple play. I'm going to sell you a video bundle where the economics, I'm not taking all the risk. I'm going to sell you mobile, and I'm going to sell you broadband. And you know what? And I'll sell you home security. And you'll never break up with me.
Doug, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree that it wouldn't make sense for them to get out of the video business. The way they're in in a way they've made a shift in recent years where they're trying to make themselves economically indifferent to video. So what they're doing is they're not marketing video as much, and when they get price increases from the programmers, they just pass them through in their entirety. So I think that they're trying to minimize their exposure, their economic exposure to video, but as long as they can pass through the increases, it is beneficial to have video in the bundle. You'll see things on the margin, like Evan said, there's a distinction between taking a retail price from a consumer and then cutting a check back to a cable network versus being a conduit for a streaming service to go direct to consumer and taking a rev share, right? They're just sort of an inversion of the same thing. What I think you'll see is it's already happening, but you're going to see the cable programmers or cable operators increasingly remove analog capacity off their networks as they move to all digital. So they're going to have a smaller and smaller proportion of their bandwidth allocated toward video in general. So I think we're already, like, if you look right now at the math, I think Comcast's gross margin on video is like 37%, right? So, for every dollar of video revenue they take in, they're keeping 37 cents off the top. But then when you allocate all the other costs of running the network and rolling trucks and all that, it's probably low single digits or break even business on an operating profit basis right now. So I think their goal is to minimize the adverse impact, but keep the benefit of having video as part of the bundle.
Yeah, it's a great observation. I'd love to future cast now a little bit. Let's, 3D TVs didn't really work. I guess a bunch of friends sitting around in a room with glasses on trying to watch television maybe wasn't a good value prop for everybody. But, we have the emergence of AI now, right? Artificial intelligence. And we've got Apple coming out with their cool glasses, the whole Metaverse. let's kind of take a look into the future a little bit and see the impact that AI and maybe the metaverse might have on, television viewing experiences. Who would like to jump in and grab that one?
I think Doug is the biggest expert in this area, if I had to take a guess.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't lump all those things together. The metaverse and AI are different things, but the sentence that I've been, writing and saying for the past like year and a half or so is that the last decade in film and TV was really defined by the disruption of distribution, and the next decade will be defined by the disruption of content creation. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. Historically, in the video, in the pay TV business, there were two big moats. There was a moat around content distribution, because you needed to own this really expensive underlying infrastructure. And there was a moat around content creation because it was expensive and risky. And one moat fell, and that was the distribution moat. And that's how Netflix came in. And again, I think that you can point to all of the challenges that the industry are currently facing. I don't know if it's an exaggeration to say all of them can be traced back to that disruption of distribution, the squeezing out of the excess profits, and the fact that there's now just less money to go around. But even as the cost to move the bits plummeted, the cost to make the bits went up. The cost to make a premium hour of TV doubled. The cost to make a tentpole movie doubled, right? So that one moat has remained extraordinarily intact, the moat of content creation. So the question is, what happens if you have an industry that's already reeling from the last disruption, now has another disruption around the corner? And I think the risk, I think what's misunderstood about this is that a lot of people are asking, well, is AI going to replace Hollywood? Are you going to use AI to make, the next Game of Thrones? That's not the right standard. The standard is, will AI disrupt Hollywood? And I think the answer is it will, because I think it's going to exacerbate a disruption that's already underway. Because if you look what's happening right now, Hollywood is, when I'm using Hollywood as a catch-all for, the professionally produced content, that entire professionally produced film, TV content ecosystem, it's already being disrupted from the bottom by creators, by YouTube, right? So you can see right now, you think again about that kind of low-end disruption. The way it works is someone comes in from the bottom, and the first thing they go after is the least demanding customer. So who's the least demanding customer? Kids. What's the most popular kids show in the world? CoComelon on YouTube, right? You're like, okay, well, now we're going to go up the curve. What's the next least most demanding customer? Like, okay, unscripted reality programming. The most popular unscripted show in the world is Mr. Beast on YouTube. So the question really, I think, is, does Gen AI pour gas on that fire? Does it enable creator content to continue to move up the quality curve and increasingly challenge Hollywood or professionally produced content for user time? And it doesn't mean it has to be as good. It just means that it has to compete for time. So I think that, to me, I was sitting there running investor relations in 2009 when Netflix did the Stars deal, and we used to laugh about Netflix. The only thing we were talking about Netflix was how it was threatening our DVD business, right? Because they use the arbitrage around the first sale doctrine to mail out DVDs in envelopes. And we're like, yeah, the streaming thing is a joke. And then they do the Stars deal, and they get the Sony and Disney pay one movie rights and 2,500 movies. And we're like, whoa, wait, this could be something. And we watched it happen, and we did a lot of things to try to stop it, and they all failed. And I just think we're back there again, where this is coming from the bottom. And in a lot of ways, I think the industry is less well positioned, even though they've just gone through it and they've seen it happen. I think they're in worse position now to preempt this because, for a variety of reasons. Maybe the most important is that they were disrupted when distribution changed, where the big media companies should have been somewhat agnostic to distribution. Content creation is much more core to what they do. So that's a long answer to your question, but I think that Gen AI is not going to happen tomorrow. But if you look at the trajectory and you do a little pattern recognition as to what we've already seen in the past decade, I think we're setting ourselves up for it to happen again. And it's for an industry that's already challenged. I think it could be it definitely could be the death blow for some of these companies.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of maybe put a finer point on the on what the disruption is going to be. So AI itself is not that it's a tool for disruption, just like streaming was a tool for destruction and disruption for Netflix. But you know, streaming wasn't the thing that just disrupted. It was the habits that they formed and the fact that Netflix could get all this content for a very low price. The way, I mean, Doug described this, but I would put a name on it, which is the creator economy, to me, is the thing that's going to disrupt the gatekeeper economy, the big traditional media players. And AI is going to be a massive part of this. And Doug has written about this a lot. If a creator can make a $50 million looking film on YouTube now because Gen AI empowers them, and it's not necessarily doable today, but TikTok, like we're not that far away from it, to be honest with you. You know, the number, to go back to Bridget's point from a while ago, which is they migrated to these younger consumers migrated to these other platforms, primarily on mobile. Well, today, most video in the home is watched on connected television. And the number one channel on television is YouTube. Used more than Netflix, it's used more than ABC, it's used more. Kids is one of the largest drivers, but not exclusively kids either. There are a lot of consumers, kids and otherwise, who use YouTube on connected television every single day. And a lot of that is driven by what I call the community economy, but most people call the creator economy. And I think tools like AI will be the democratization of professionalized content that's going to compete. You know, you may not think Mr. Beast is as good as other shows on TV, but don't tell his audience that, because they do. So I think the major disruption, I think half of the value that's going to come from the media economy by the end of next decade will come from the creator economy, half. And I think that's the turning point whereby which traditional media will become broadcast to creator economies cable, or traditional television to creator economies streaming, or whatever parallel you want to draw there. But, you know, more and more artists are going to go direct to consumers in more and more different ways with different economic models. It's not just about clicks. It's also people make a lot of money from subscriptions and selling products. And I have a Substack that is a revenue generator for me. So, you know, I think the technology will empower the creator economy, which is the next big disruptor from my mind.
Thank you. Bridget, anything you'd like to add?
You guys have covered it obviously so well, but again, I just flash on things that are very much about, and these are probably two kind of unicorn examples, but the idea of the creators directly to consumers and the whole sort of TikTok, how that has come about, you know, what is a viral moment now, and how segregated that might be, you know, generationally and in every other way. But I've watched over this last, just take year for an example, and to use her, I'm going to, the whole Taylor Swift phenomenon, which I was not really a part, I was not a part of it. And I did stumble during the COVID years on her, believe it or not, NPR Tiny Desk concert. And because I was home with, you know, the whole COVID thing, I thought, wait, I could not have named a song of hers, not one. And I said, wait, was this the girl that went up against Spotify about the license fees? Was this every identification I had with her were big swings that she and her team had taken in the business world. It had nothing to do with her music. And of course, I then went down the rabbit hole in a major way. You now can call me a deep state Swiftie 100%. By the time she got to the SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, I was watching her TikTok videos from consumers. Like I watched the Olympics, you know, every night. It was like on there, you know, hashtag after 11:30 p.m., you know, Eras Tour, Swiftie moment, whatever. And now one of the things when she was named Time Person of the Year, one of the things that other publications such as New York Times, et cetera, were writing about her was that was the first time she had sat down for an interview with anybody since the beginning of 2018. And of course, the summation of that observation was kind of, she doesn't need to. What is a New York Times interview going to do for Taylor Swift? Nothing. Yeah. So when you have this whole, and we saw it with the Kardashians, I mean, we've seen it, and I know I'm naming women in particular who are of a certain sort of millennial age. But my point is that, I can remember a long time ago, a VC company that had reached out to me. They were trying to start an app that was just this exact thing, and in a way it's been built on Instagram, which is why does Mark Zuckerberg get the benefit of all this? Because in a way, what then happened is all these creators, they're creators, right? And influencers created this vertical and wealth that they get off the back of Instagram when they could have maybe done it direct through an app for themselves. But I'm sure Beyonce falls in this category as well. I mean, she gets ready to drop an album. It's a surprise album. She doesn't have Universal Music Group or Republic Records or whatever, schmoozing Billboard magazine and going to Rolling Stone and saying, hey, we need to have an interview with Beyonce. She just drops a picture.
She goes right to her community and she says it's coming out.
And by the way, neither one of the two women I've mentioned even have to go on TikTok. I mean, their followers
the Eras Tour movie, self-distributed, self-produced, self-financed, direct, complete, package from a creator economy standpoint. And the reissuing of her music, same thing. They all took the risks and they have figured out, this new paradigm that disrupts Spotify, disrupts, Live Nation, all these other places.
All of it. So that's what it makes me kind of add on to, it may be an AI bot in 10 years, but we're already seeing the direct creator economy to the customer and viewer. And Evan, I love that you brought up the film. Of course, that's the obvious one because it completely sidestepped all of the Hollywood mechanics that would have been there prior.
Great. Hey, we're up against the clock, so I wanted to thank you all for your time. It's been a great discussion. Certainly a lot of information I think hopefully will be valuable for people that are watching this. So thanks again for your help. I appreciate it very much, and I wish you all the best down the road.
Great
You
conversation.
too,
Thank you,
Bruce.
Bruce. All right. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Hey,
Bye, you guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.